Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Middleism Apologetics. This is part two of End of Time. We are dealing with and giving an answer to Julian Chambers from the website Full Program, A Thing of the Past, where we're talking about heaven being our last and final home. What about the new heavens and earth, the great white throne judgment? Meaning that many of the times that we talk about, we deal with the second coming and the resurrection, but we also know that the full preterist believes that the great white throne judgment also took place and the new heavens and earth arrived, which they have to spiritualize both and demand that it did happen, which makes it and forces it to be real events. But of course, that creates way too many inconsistencies with what scriptures actually teach. So we're going back over some of that stuff, and I'm going into part two here with chapter 20. And we're going to be talking, of course, from a premillennial post-trib coming of Christ and that thing. And we'll explain a little bit why we're not amill or post-mill and put some of those pieces together for you there if those who are interested. I'm hoping to keep this down to about a half an hour. That would be my goal. I've got nothing better to do with coronavirus running around. I'm shut up in my house for 2 weeks. So here we go. Let's see if I'm in the right place. Nope. Okay. We want to get out of theater mode. And here we are back into... Nope. Okay, come on. No, I did it. Okay. Yeah, that worked. Sorry. All right. Revelations 20. I got to get used to these buttons, so I just flipped around and make sure I'm in the right place. I did the last video. I did about 20 minutes and then realized I haven't flipped and nobody saw anything. So I had to delete that and do it over again. So I don't want that to happen again. All right, here we are in Revelations 20. Now, then I saw an angel come down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, bound him for 1,000 years, and then threw him into the pit and shut it and sealed it over him so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. Now, I'm going to point out real quick. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison. The language here between 1 and 3 is all about a prison. Back in those days, you got arrested, your hands were bound, you were taken to the jail, put behind bars, and then even chained to the wall, and kept chained up against the wall with the prisoner guard on the outside. Thrown into a pit, shut and sealed over him. Kind of same imagery here, like when Peter and all of a sudden one goes blank here in the book of Acts, when the two of them were arrested, they were taken in, bound up behind bars, and they started to worship, and of course the gates came down. But the idea here, that's what it is describing in prison. Now here's the problem with Amill. Amill wants to interpret this as a binding of authority. So if you bind the strong man, you can still rob his house, but you follow that. What our problem is, of course, is that Satan is bound for 1,000 years, thrown into the pit and all that, so he might not deceive the nations any longer. This is not a binding of authority. This is stopping him from going about all these nations and deceiving them, leading them into error. For instance, every Muslim country is in deception right now. That's the easiest way to put it. He's not able to deceive the nations any longer. Second thing that's important about this 1,000 years, this perfect time frame happens after the second coming, and I'll explain why in a second, but it happens with the literal event of Satan being thrown into a prison where he cannot roam the earth and deceive the nations. Now, we go back to Peter and other verses. What does it say? Satan roams this earth as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. If you got Satan running around, that's where they justify the idea that it was only his authority bound. Like in Acts 28, when the 7 sons of Sceva were running around, and it was these Jewish people who came to him and locked him in there. This one guy and said, in the name of Jesus, who Paul preaches, we command you. And the demon responded back, Paul I know, Jesus I know, you I don't know. And then he attacked them because they had no authority over demons. The only people that were given authority over demons, of course, are Christians. So there's that authority. But in this case here, we're not talking about binding of authority. We're talking about imprisonment. So Satan is still free to roam around. He is still free to deceive people ever since after the cross. He has lost his authority over believers, but he is still called by Peter the prince and the power of this air. He is still the one who rules over this world until Christ makes all of his enemies a footstool. That includes Satan too. He has not stopped Satan from doing what he does. All he has done is used Satan for his purposes. Let me give you an illustration. And I'm just doing this in a kind of brief way. God is using all the bad things and the negative things to happen for his glory, for something to good account of it. And here's why I'm saying this. Think about it. If God is sovereign, there's not a famine or feast or a rainstorm or tornado or anything else that he cannot stop. He could have stopped that tornado down in Nashville a little while ago. But he didn't. He allowed it to happen. There was good people, good Christians that were affected by that, might even died. But the idea is that tornado a judgment? No, not necessarily. The idea is that tornadoes happen. Earthquakes happen. Rain falls on the just and the unjust. God does not say he can withhold the rain. He can stop it, but rain's going to come. It'll rain on people. Storms will come on good people, bad people all alike. And so when it came to Joseph, what was it said about Joseph? I created Joseph for a time such as this, to protect his family. Well, God, all he had to do, if he wanted his family protected, everything, all he did had to stop the famine in the whole land, and therefore, what was the need for Joseph to be there for all that to happen for Joseph? If he could have just stopped it, people just could have gone as they were. The point is that God allows this thing to happen for us as a witness to us about God's faithfulness, his glory, him doing what he wants to do in people to perfect them through the things that they go through to make them the better people that they are. So that's why he allows those things to happen, and for him to raise people up to be that witness to his people and an example too. So I know that's a side note. So the idea though here is that in the amil premillennial position, that is the key thing right here, is that we believe that this binding of Satan is not a binding, but a literal imprisonment, because that's what it says. He will be released from his prison. He is not being released from his ability to deceive nations. It says he will come out to deceive the nations. This has to be literal. You cannot bind somebody and say, you can come out of your binding now. That just seems, no. All right, moving on then. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison, will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. And so their number, again, is like the sand of the sea, thousands upon thousands. Okay, understand this. Some people have claimed in a post that, he comes at the post, he comes at the end of tribulation. Everything happens after this. And so this is talking again in a condensed version in 20 is the second coming of Christ. So the second coming of Christ is described in 19. So again, this passages in through here are talking about a repeat of Revelation 19. So we're just repeating kind of a condensed version of what happened after the resurrection till, his second coming. And that's we've already proven that's a problem with Satan being released from his prison. So what we have in the premill understanding of the post-trib coming is that when Christ comes down, he rules the nations. He will rule on earth, according to Zechariah 14. There will be people who will survive that came against Israel, and for that 1,000-year time frame is when his saints will rule with them in our vindication. We will rule over the nations as his servants, as his representatives, ambassadors, however you want to put it. And then, of course, with Satan gone, the evilness and the deceptions, and of course, Christ brings healing to the world when he comes and when he brings it under. But that doesn't mean he's made all his enemies his footstool, because there's still this final thing to happen. And that means when Satan is released, all those people have been now living with Christ, ruling with the saints, the resurrected saints. These resurrected saints are imperishable, immortal. They do not die, but here they are ruling from Jerusalem over the earth. And I promise you, there's a lot of 100,000 questions I have too. That doesn't explain every little detail. I do not understand. In fact, this is the only passage that really talks about the millennial period in Scripture. You find very few places where it's even kind of idea like in Isaiah 64, I believe it is, and different places where it talks about a new heaven and a new earth. This is kind of a new heaven and a new earth in the sense that now Jesus rules on it. There's a new order to things. He's ruling over the nations and he's in control. But Satan is released, deceives the nations again, and they come and they march across the broad plain of the earth. Now this is when they surround the camp of the saints in the beloved city. The beloved city is Jerusalem. It's not found no more. AD 70, every one of those full preterists tell us if that is the great city of the harlot, the prostitute, how in the world can he be calling that prostitute city and everything else the beloved city here and the camp of the saints? How can Jerusalem be the camp of the saints when this army is coming against her? Because, see, in 70 AD, the saints were told to flee. They fled. There were no Christians left in Jerusalem. A camp is the word, Greek word for barracks. Let me show you. So this is his army. Remember, the armies came down with him. Now, if they came with him, they're ruling with him over the earth. And circle the camp. Okay, here it is. Parabolum. Parambole. A camp, a barracks, an army in battle array. Okay, what was the army that came? Christ. He came with the saints. So, the camp of Israelites, that's where it is. It's the barracks, it's the castle. It's all interpreted as the place where an army dwells. Revelations 29, here's where we're at, outside the camp. So this is the place where this army dwells. It's a barracks, army for battle. So the camp of the saints is where the saints who came back as his army are camping out. Hegion, the saints, and the city having been beloved. Having been beloved. The beloved city. Wow. And that's only can be Jerusalem. Only can be Jerusalem. The city that he loves. Matthew 23. Oh, if I could have gathered you in my wings, I would have done it. The beloved city. So, what happens? They march over the plains of the earth. They surround the camp of the cities, the beloved city, Jerusalem. And fire comes down from heaven and consumes them. So, if this was Nero the beast and all of that, they surround Jerusalem. Fire comes down and destroys what? The world of the ungodly. Not Israel, not Jerusalem. This fire that comes down burns all the ungodly people. Period. Done. Gone. This is not a spiritual defeat. This is literal. Then the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and false prophet were or are. The idea is that the devil is now joining the beast and the false prophet. When was the beast and false prophet thrown in there? When Christ returned. Before the 1,000 years. Before Satan was bound. That's when they were thrown in. They would be tormented day and night. Okay, so the picture is this. Christ has come down. 1,000 years has taken place. Satan released. The armies gather. And then all of a sudden, fire comes down. 2 Peter 3, the earth and the works of man are burnt up. All the ungodly are burnt up. They are destroyed. Instead of water that destroyed the ungodly in Noah's day, it is now fire that comes down and burns them up and judges them. Now they're all dead. All the Christians now, we can't be killed. We're immortal and perishable. We're going to be taken up into heaven. This earth is being burnt up and being remade. And for the love of God, people understand this. Nobody's ever saying that the heavens and the earth are completely destroyed and God has to recreate them like John MacArthur and some of the others state. This is not about that. This is about the idea that everything on the surface, all the ungodly, everything that man made is burnt up and destroyed. And in order to do that, everybody has to leave. We'll make that simple. Okay, so I saw a great white throne and I was seeing it, and from his presence, earth and sky fled away. See, we're not worried about earth and sky. We're not. We are now all in his realm, in that other realm. Nothing here is taking place on earth. It is happening in heaven. No place was found them, so they don't have nothing to do with what's about here to go on. And I saw, because it's a great white throne, and he's seated on it, that's in heaven. This comes from Daniel 7. Let's go there. I want to make sure you catch the imagery here. This is Daniel 7. 9. As I looked, thrones were placed. The Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair pure wool. His throne was of fiery flames, wheels burning fire. A stream of fire issued out and came out from behind him. Thousands and thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. Okay? This is a scene of judgment, the final judgment. Now, I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. There you go. Same image, right? Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. Now, I want to point out two things here. You've got to pay attention to this. Earth and sky have fled away. There's nobody there on the earth. It's totally burnt up. Just like the flood killed everybody on it at one point, except for the 7 that were saved. All the earth is burned up. Everybody that was good has been taken off. They are now in heaven standing before the great white throne judgment. So there's nobody on earth giving birth or anything else going on. That's the end of it. That means there is nobody else going from this point forward, living on earth and having children, being married and having kids. In the resurrection, when the Christian is made immortal and imperishable, we are no longer giving in marriage. If we're not given in marriage, we're not having kids. That's the end of it. The second thing you got to put out, the books were open. Now, Charles Meeks can argue with me about whether they're a literal book or not. That's not the point. The point is that God is going, I know those who are saved, the book of life. I know everybody who is ever going to live and every person that is going to be saved. There is not one person that could be added to the book of life that God did not know about. If you think somebody become later on and say, oh, I was saved and God didn't know about it, now he's got to add my name to the book of life. What you're saying is that God is not omniscient, that he doesn't know everything. So either he knows everybody, he knows every person ever lived since the foundation of the world, or he doesn't. My God knows everybody who has ever lived or ever will live. He knows them all. He knows everything about them. He designed them. He knows what's going to happen to them. So all these dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they did. So here's the other thing. The book of life. If there is a list of people, he knows. And in this book, metaphorically, there's a last page with the last name written on it. It's a finite number. It is not infinite. If it was infinite, you could add more names to it. An infinite book means then that there are no end to the names. But the problem is that Christ said, I wrote your name in the book of life before the foundation of the world. Before everything even started, he had your name written in it. Therefore, it is a finite book. Now, everybody is written according to what's written in the books. And that means your list of deeds, according to what you have done. Now, he goes back. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Now, remember, this is a resurrection of the unjust. In other words, if somebody's thrown into a lake of fire but has no body, it's just a spirit. Do spirits burn? Do they feel pain? No, it's only your flesh that can do that. You can only die in your flesh. The spirit does not die, cannot suffer pain and all those things. It can only happen with flesh. I think that's a common sense thing. Should be for most people. So when he says the sea gave up the dead, what's giving up? The dead bodies. The people that had died in the sea, their bodies come out. Death, the graves, all the bodies that are in the graves come out. They walk. We're talking about physical death, the body. And then Hades is where the spirits are of the unjust. They're the ones who are still there. See, according to full preterism, that 80s ended in 70, so nobody's going there. They've all been judged. And everybody, when they die afterwards, goes either go to hell or they go to heaven. One of the two, because everybody's judged. And there's two very basic problems with that. Paul says especially it is appointed for men to live once and then face judgment. Every person always has to face their judgment. Nobody is going to be thrown to hell without standing before God first and saying, and having an account. Imagine a trial taking place where the trial, we already had the trial. You've been found guilty already and you're going to hell. But wait a minute, don't I get to speak? Don't I get my chance to say anything? No, sorry. You were killed and judged and all that in absentia. Sorry, that's not how the courts in heaven work. He says, I want you to give an account of your life. Where does it say? According to what they had done. So let's look at what you've done. You're being judged according to what you have done. You've lived your once life. Now you've got to face this judgment. So that alone is why J. Stuart Russell never accepted the great white throne judgment was done. That's why he said it was still future, because he recognized that every person who has ever lived has to stand before God and give himself an account. And if this is the great white throne judgment where all the dead, all the unjust who have ever lived are facing that judgment, then it cannot happen to pass, because it still has, all these people that lived after AD still have to have a chance to stand before the throne. So if the great white throne happened then these people will never get a chance to stand before the throne and give an account. And Paul says all men will give an account. Now, death and Hades gave up the dead, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. He said it 3 times, hasn't he? Then death and Hades was thrown into lake and fire, which means it ends. There is no death. There is no more physical death. Nobody dies and gets separated and their bodies go into a grave and your spirit into Hades. No more of that. It's done. It's over with. Then that means there's no humans being born. Because if there was, they're still facing physical death. They die. Their bodies goes into the ground. Their spirit goes into Hades. That is all ended. All of it's ended. The death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. It just simply means that's the end of it. They burn forever and ever. There's no longer exist. So this is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So all of the unjust are thrown into the lake of fire. And what is about the lake of fire? They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. You can say, well, is there flames or just outer darkness? It doesn't matter really what it is. The idea is that you are separated from God. He gave you what you chose. All of this and through here, God never sends anybody to hell that doesn't deserve it. He never sends anybody to heaven that doesn't deserve it. Same thing. He doesn't make people go to heaven any more than he makes people go to hell. They choose because of what they do and what they did while they were alive here on the earth, and then they were judged. So everybody who has found it, he's thrown into the lake of fire, and he will die forever and ever and ever. It's a state of death. And death is a whole lot worse than being physically dead. Being spiritually dead, separated from God, being separated from any kind of life, any kind of hope. Imagine just being in a place where there is absolutely nothing. That's torment, knowing that there will ever be hope for you, redemption for you, or anything else. And why is that? Because if God sent his only begotten son to die for you, and he died on that cross, he gave his son, and then he spread the word through everybody. All you have to do is accept that Jesus died for you and believe in him and put your faith in him. That's all you had to do to escape the lake of fire. That's what he was trying to save you from. Not from the destruction of 70 AD or anything else. He was trying to save you from facing that lake of fire. And he did everything he can. He will do everything he can. He will send people into your life every which way is possible, and until the very last second will give you a chance to repent and come to him. but people still choose not to. So when they end up there, it's not because he sent them, it's because they chose to go there. They understand. Every man is without excuse. Well, I didn't know about Jesus. Oh, come on. Everybody walking up and down the streets. What's that building? It's a church. Well, what's a church for? Well, that's people go to worship God. Who's God? Well, he's the one who created the heavens and the earth. Oh, I don't want to worship him. I want to do my own thing. Or, wow, does he really care about me? Yes. See, that's the message. There's nobody. Everybody's going to be without excuse. All right, this wraps up Daniel 20. Daniel 20, excuse me. Revelations 20. And this basically presents the premillennial position and why we direct the post. This is not about the second coming. And the reason is it's not about the second coming is because it talks about Satan being thrown in, not the beast and the false prophet. Beast and false prophet are already, we're already there. So there's your separations. That's why we take the position and reject post and use 20 as a recap. And I understand the other ideas about the war and things like this, but these are the camp of the saints. So I won't rehash all of that. And you can find those kind of things in papers and blogs. And again, as I'm closing up here, I just want to remind people, I did have the book here. It is on Kindle. You can find it there, and it lays out a lot of this already for you. Explains the things in more details and stuff, and puts it out there. So I appreciate you listening. This is part 2. Next part, of course, we're going to go into the new heavens and earth, and hopefully we can sum up 21 and 22 in just one short message. So thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you being here. And you guys, did it work? Yes, it did. Hi. Have a good night, and we will see you later. And 3 will come and follow later. Catch you on the flap side. Bye.